Next speaker, Ambassador Schwartz. Ambassador Schwartz has a 31-year career in government that accumulated in 2016 with his appointment as the first U.S. ambassador to Somalia since 1991. Since his retirement in 2017, Mr. Schwartz has served frequently as a foreign policy expert at U.S. military training events and guest speakers on Somalia, international and other international relation venues. Mr. Schwartz served as deputy chief of the mission in Zambia and in Mauritius, and as a mid-level junior officer in Ethiopia, South Africa, Cuba, and Burundi. In Washington, he served as Director of the Office of West African Affairs, Director and Deputy Director of the Office of Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Island Affairs, Desk Officer for Sudan, and Special Assistant for African and Western Hemisphere Affairs under the Secretary of Political Affairs. Before joining the Foreign Service in 1992, Mr. Schwartz served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon and worked at Peace Corps headquarters. He also worked in the Africa program at the Brookings Institute think tank and at the Citizens Democracy Corps, a non-governmental organization non-developmental organization established to assist people in Central and Eastern Europe. Mr. Schwartz has earned his master's degree in National Security Studies from the National War College and in African Studies from the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies. He has a bachelor's degree in business administration from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. He is a native of Buffalo, New York, and resides with his family in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us, and we thank you for your service. And it was truly historic, your appointment to be in the first U.S. ambassador from the U.S. to Somalia since the collapse of the Somali government in 1991. So welcome, and the stage is yours. You're on mute.
Thank you very much, Mohamed. And thank you for the invitation to serve with such a distinguished panel. I recall fondly President Sheikh Sharif from our numerous interactions when I was ambassador. Martine, I met in Nairobi in 2016, and you I'm just getting to know through this, and it's already quite interesting and rewarding. It was really an honor serving as ambassador to Somalia in 2016, 2017. It was a period of transition. It was the end of the Hassan Sheikh administration and the advent of the Farmajo administration, a period that was challenging for Somalia, but one that I think they came through very well. I appreciate Martine's explanation of sort of the defector program and the outreach. It's something that I did work on a bit when I was there, and it's something that I think is critical to sort of restoring health in a country and defeating extremist groups. My presentation is going to sort of look more at a macro level and setting the stage and the circumstances by which defector programs, for example, I think could thrive. Because as I've seen the situation in Somalia, I see insecurity there as a symptom of decades of inadequate governance and legitimacy of state institutions. And Al-Shabaab has filled that gap, that governing gap. But it needs to be taken back by governing institutions, which need to establish their legitimacy and provide services, including security, to the population. And when I say government, I mean government at all levels. This isn't just a federal government challenge or responsibility. This is for all levels, and even non-governmental organizations, be they clan or business or whatever, need to be working together to promote civilian life and rule of law. That is how you take the space away from Al-Shabaab and restore good governance. When I look back over the last 3 years, and I've been away for most of that time, I do see some some progress under this administration. Certainly, from my experience, keeping a president and prime minister together for over 3 years is novel for Somalia. It hasn't happened since, I think, the 60s. They did well on revenue generation and public financial management and attained debt relief, which is a huge accomplishment for the country. I think there's a bit more accountability and capability in the SNA, but far too little to do the job they've been assigned. But I think it's not enough. And I think Somalia is at a critical moment now. The removal of the prime minister makes things more precarious, I think. Not for me to comment on why or even how, and I think nobody's surprised that eventually there was a split between the president and prime minister. But nevertheless, the country is at a moment with a caretaker government. There's no agreed electoral process. No one knows for how long this caretaker government will try to extend itself and the parliament, what kind of electoral process they'll come up with. And meanwhile, I think that recent developments call into question and are exacerbated by some international developments. I mean, if Somalia's very strong democratic character is going to be compromised, I don't know, that could possibly cost them a bit of support from the West. Kenya is flirting considerably with Somaliland. Egypt and Ethiopia are at very serious odds over the dam, and that is an issue politically which spreads through the Horn. The Gulf crisis remains in effect with Somalia being seen on one side of that. And through it all, al-Shabaab remains pervasive. And, it has seemed to me throughout this period that one of the biggest impediment, I think, to progress in Somalia has been, I'd say, an unwillingness really on the part of the federal government to establish respectful and productive working relationships with the federal member states. And absent a constructive relationship between those two levels of government, very little good was able to be implemented for the benefit of the Somali people. As ambassador, I identified 6 or 7 sort of key areas that I thought needed to be addressed to help Somalia move past its real absence of social trust and begin to bind together a country. First, reconciliation, and I'm not sure that there's been much progress at all on reconciliation, whether it's at a micro level between villages or clans or over property, or with Somaliland, for example. Revenue generation is sort of the only bright spot on my list. Public services, be it health or education, not tremendous progress on the government side. Security, minimal improvements, I'd say. Rule of law, I don't know, there's still not a constitution. Are the police and judicial systems much better? I don't think so. Corruption, still not under control. And electoral process. So yes, some things got done, but not enough, and nothing can get done until the different levels of government can pull together. I think once you do have government working in the same direction, and starting to show the Somali people that government can provide some security, it can provide some services, it can provide some justice and security, people will immediately flock to it. But now, and for years, the way I've understood it is that government can provide those things. Even in the areas it controls, it doesn't really administer them. There's no real benefits being conferred. Whereas in the al-Shabaab areas, although people may not choose it, at least they have a predictable level of taxation and security and justice and cultural norms or rules. They know what to expect one day to another, whereas you don't have that kind of, security or predictability in the government areas. And in fact, in meetings I had with both President Hassan Sheikh and President Formaggio, I sort of laid out their challenge in my eyes in that light, that as soon as government can start to provide security and justice and services, as well as Al-Shabaab will have no support in the country. I mean, it has a relatively small number, I think, of hardcore adherents, real ideologues. Most people, I believe, have joined because they have nothing to do. They have no income. And at least this gives them some kind of community and purpose and food and maybe money. But it's weak. But unfortunately, government institutions are still, by and large, weaker. And that needs to change. And that's really the responsibility of government leaders, is to make that happen, to make the compromises and to set the course to move Somalia forward. So I'll stop there. Happy to comment and take questions later, but thanks.